We don't really have time for like a cute intro here. We've got breaking news. We've got a lot of stuff I know you and I had already wanted to get to before all this came down. So let's just get into it, Drew. I feel like I've been avoiding you kind of for these last 15 minutes, even though we've also been working together on this because I wanted to save a lot of this conversation for the podcast. What's going on here?
Right. I mean, this was a shock to me when I saw the headline from Wall Street Journal, and then obviously went right to getting our story up for Awful Announcing. But, my first instincts on this was like, this makes a lot of sense, right? Warner Brothers Discovery has stuff that Paramount would want, and Paramount certainly has things that Warner Brothers Discovery would want in the form of a broadcast network. So if you think about a merged entity here, right? You're going to say, all right, we're putting HBO Max and Paramount together. Great. We're combining CBS News and CNN. Great. We're going to get all of the sports rights that Warner Brothers Discovery has currently. So we're talking college football playoff. We're talking the rest of the NCAA men's basketball tournament, MLB and NHL playoffs, NASCAR, French Open, college football. That's all stuff that would fit perfectly into CBS Sports' current portfolio, which, quite honestly, if you think about it, is pretty light. They have, a little bit of college football. They have the NFL, of course. They have the March Madness. They have Masters. They have golf. But other than that, if we're talking tonnage here, their true tonnage sport is, like Champions League soccer. And, that's for Paramount Plus. So you bring in a lot of these sports properties from Warner Brothers Discovery. It bolsters the streaming service, and it also gives you a lot more programming to put on CBS. And we've all seen that, broadcast is king now when it comes to live sports, and you want to have more of that type of programming on your network.
Yeah, and you have UFC now on the Paramount side.
Exactly.
So you have it's weird because you're right. Just from a sports perspective, which is I think obviously where a lot of our minds went with this stuff is, CBS has. Like they have the NFL, and the NFL is obviously king. And so they have the NFL, but their secondary sports, I mean, they brought in UFC and UFC like instantly jumped to becoming probably their number 2 sport, depending on your feelings about Champions League. So that part of it makes sense. And then you look at the Warner Brothers side, and they actually have like a fairly decent like secondary package. They don't have, without the NBA, they don't have the headliner, but they have a part of the baseball playoffs. They have March Madness. They have AEW wrestling. They have some NASCAR, some hockey. Like they have a solid secondary package, but they just don't have the headliner. So now you add in the NFL, you add in this massive UFC deal. Like this is a much more complete package for both sides, right?
100%. And, we know consolidation is coming in this industry. So in order to compete, you're going to have scale. And there's going to be a lot of, calls from people in the media that say, this shouldn't get approved. This is, where these companies are becoming too big. They're going to have too much, market share. And, those concerns are valid, right? But we're talking about at this point in the media business, you need to have the scale to compete with Disney, Comcast, Amazon, Google. Like Warner Brothers Discovery and Paramount, even under new ownership, do not have that. This kind of reminds me a lot of like some of the mergers we've seen from distributors like Dish merging with I can't even remember, but the Dish merger, they needed the market share to be able to compete with, Comcast and DirecTV and all that. So it's like, this is kind of just what happened. Dish. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So this is what needs to happen if you're Warner Brothers Discovery, because, let's be honest, like if you're splitting off your cable assets and you're kind of sending them out to die, like someone's going to buy those anyway. Perhaps, if you have a bidder like David Ellison that is willing to buy the whole package, you're probably going to maximize your value that way more so than, selling your company for parts. So I think this makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, and this is something they've been talking about a lot on one of the shows you and I often reference on this show, The Town with Matthew Bellany, the Puck Ringer Hollywood podcast. They've been talking about this. They were kind of under the impression like this was going to happen sooner than later with these particular pieces. And when it comes to the antitrust stuff, one thing they brought up, I think this week, was the key to it is that Warner Brothers Discovery does not have a broadcast channel, that they're not a broadcast news network. So that's like typically the big concern, right, in these cases. And so the fact that you aren't consolidating to broadcast networks, it does add to the idea that this is not, those antitrust things aren't necessarily, it makes it more likely, I think, that it gets approved. That would seem to be the hang up.
100%. And you also have to think, under new ownership, under David Ellison and Larry Ellison, we have an administration that is quite friendly with that family. So I don't think you're going to see the type of hang up you did when we saw this Paramount Skydance merger, where the Trump administration might be trying to pull some strings and get some concessions out of Paramount. I think this is going to be a much more favorable environment for Paramount to work in and get this deal done. And quite frankly, I think our listeners might care more about like what this means to them and their sports viewing habits. And if I'm being honest, I think this is a good thing for consumers. So when we're talking about antitrust, regulations and guardrails, like those are supposed to be pro-consumer. Consumers are clamoring for an easier way to consume these products, right? And so if you're putting these two companies together, now you're putting it under one umbrella, you're going to get it all in one streaming service under one company. That's better than subscribing to one, Paramount Plus and HBO Max and whatever TNT Sports streamer is going to, this kind of puts everything together. And I think that's a win for consumers.
So real quick, the split that you've been writing about, the split between Warner Brothers Discovery, the streaming services and the Hollywood, and then the cable assets, like that would just be done. Like there would be no split. Paramount would be buying the whole thing outright.
Right. Yeah. This is what the Wall Street Journal is reporting. And it's kind of funny because yesterday, David Zaslav, the CEO of Warner Brothers Discovery, was on stage at a Goldman Sachs conference discussing the timeline of the split and saying, it's going to be done in April 2026, which to me made sense. And I'm sure that's still on the table if this deal can't get done. But, April 2026 makes sense because you're going to do it after TNT airs the Final Four this year and also the national championship game for March Madness. So obviously people rely on HBO Max for that viewing of those sports. So, that timeline made sense. But if this deal is going to get done, I mean, it wouldn't happen that quick, but that split is off the table.
Are the Ellisons just about to own everything? Like I think Larry just overtook Elon Musk as the richest person in the world. They just complete the Paramount purchase. Now they're looking at Warner. Like this is a lot of things happening for somebody who we were not writing about like 6 months ago.
Yeah, I'm probably not that person to ask about that, but it sure seems like they want to be like a huge player in the media space, and this is probably the best way to do it, right? You bought Paramount, which has the broadcast network, and now look at what's on the market. Not even just Warner Brothers Discovery, but think about Versant. Like if they wanted to, they could put in a bid for Versant. They could own all of the PGA Tour inventory. They could own, Premier League soccer inventory, which would, go well with, their streaming service and their Champions League inventory. I mean, this could just be the start of things. You're right.
What last thing? What is the most interesting thing we haven't talked about? I can tell you're super geeked out about this right now.
Oh, dude,
what
this
do you want to say about this?
I just think
what has you pumped?
What has me pumped is like for the first 9 months of the Trump administration, we haven't seen this type of deal happen yet. And it was all widely expected. Once Trump gets in office, like the regulatory environment's going to be ripe for these types of consolidations. And, we just hadn't seen it. And I thought Fox personally was the biggest contender. I know I'd written about this other analysts had written about this. With all the uncertainty that was going on with their family trust, which also ironically got resolved this week, it made a lot of sense that they would be on the market for these types of deals. But now that is kind of put to the side, this I think makes a lot of sense. And I'm just happy that we're getting some more M&A, some more transactions in the industry, because ultimately, there are arguments that say, this could be bad long term, but I think in the short to medium term, this is going to be really consumer friendly, and this is really quite necessary for the industry.